terrible tragedy in District 24, and we vowed that this would never, ever happen again. Never happen again.
That was Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. When she wasn't battling the White House and President Trump last week, she held a congressional field hearing on the Hollywood nursing home crisis, which 14 residents died after Hurricane Irma knocked out power and left the nursing home without air conditioning. Congressman Henry Johnson Jr. from Atlanta was also here.
The tragic events that occurred at the Rehabilitation Center at Hollywood Hills began a national conversation over how we should prepare to ensure the safety of our elderly and disabled during natural disasters. The events have also presented an opportunity for Congress and other policymakers to revisit public policy at all levels and make meaningful reforms that will save lives in the future.
Congresswoman Lois Franco, who represents the area around West Palm Beach, noted she's amazed there weren't more tragedies like this one during Irma.
Representative Wilson, I know we all share the heartache of your constituents in this Hollywood nursing home. I wanted to tell you something. We are literally lucky that there weren't more deaths around this state, because I can give you examples in my own district 90 miles away where we had very, very cruel conditions.
Now, while Congress is looking at issues surrounding better training for nursing homes, I asked Franco if Congress really is likely to take up the issue.
Hurricanes today, this year it hit Texas big and Florida. Last year we saw New Jersey, we saw New York, obviously Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. So I do think that there are enough members of Congress that there is an appetite to make sure that we learn from what just happened.
Also, the state legislature will be a major player in all of this. There are several bills expected to be introduced promising to reform the nursing home industry. Joining me now this morning is State Senator Rene Garcia, the chairman of the committee that oversees elder affairs. Senator Garcia is expected to be a key player in the upcoming debate in Tallahassee. Senator, thank you for coming in. So you heard, the members of Congress talking about the things that they might try to do. What can we expect out of Tallahassee this year?
Well, I think Tallahassee now, first of all, thank you for having me here, and it's important to note that in Tallahassee we're taking this very serious, and we see that not only I have introduced legislation, but a handful of other legislators have introduced legislation, and we're going to do something. We definitely have to take action on this, and we just can't wait. The problem that I have with Washington is that we can't wait for Washington. Washington, it takes them forever to pass anything, so I think it's important and incumbent upon us, who have the regulatory body and the regulatory scheme here in our state, to make sure that we fix the problem that we see in the state of Florida.
We were talking a few minutes ago, and you made the point that Representative Franco did, which is you're amazed as well. We didn't have more deaths and circumstances like this around the state of Florida, correct?
Yeah, we're blessed and we're lucky that there wasn't more. This was a storm that impacted the whole state. It wasn't just one area of the state. So that's why I think Congresswoman Franco was talking about that, because there was a wide impact to the whole state. So that's why we have to make sure that we have policies in place that not only protect one part of the state, but make sure to protect the rest of the state. And some of the things that I always talk about, that we in government, we should be the voice for the voiceless. And who better to protect than these individuals that are in nursing homes who really don't have a voice?
The issue seemed to be centered around power, issues of generators, interests of getting them back up and started from the power companies. There were hundreds and hundreds of nursing homes that were knocked out across the state of Florida because of the nature of this storm. What exactly does your bill do? What exactly can we expect when it comes to that particular issue?
Bill, our bill has a couple of different components to it. Number one is to ensure that they have backup generators to cool down their facilities, to make sure that they have enough fuel to last for 4 days in their facilities. That's one. Make sure that we put them on a priority list with the power companies to ensure that they are treated the same way that you treat hospitals and first responders, that when they do lose power, they go straight to those facilities and power them back up. And the other component of it is as well to make sure that they also have enough backup power generation to supply ice. Make sure that they have a cooling system for ice and other to keep their medicines cool.
Now, I know in the issue of the Hollywood Hills nursing home, they repeatedly tried calling Florida Power and Light. They were told repeatedly that Florida Power and Light was going to come out and fix it, yet never did. When Florida Power and Light eventually did come, which was after the place was evacuated, after there were deaths in the facility, it took them approximately 20-25 minutes to fix and get them back up and power running. I know that you're not going to want to talk about whether or not this is specifically related to this, but I want to talk to you about the power that Florida Power and Light has and whether or not you think Florida Power and Light is going to let you get away with a bill like this.
It doesn't matter what FP&L wants. It's what's right for the residents of Florida, especially the people that are the voiceless that are in these nursing homes. Jim, as you very well know, it took about 25 minutes to fix the problem that you had at the nursing facility. If they would have been on a priority list, FP&L could have come out, or any power company, it's not just about FP&L, they could have fixed that in 25 minutes, and hopefully, God willing, we wouldn't have had the deaths that we would have had.
What you're referring to is that it took 4 days for FP&L to come out finally, and when they did, after the place was evacuated and those deaths occurred, it did just take them 25 minutes to flip the transformer and get power up and running. But FP&L's argument is going to be, because we've heard it before, is that if you make nursing homes a priority, then you're going to have to make ALFs a priority. If you make ALFs a priority, you're going to have to make folks like Century Village a priority. And then if everybody's a priority one, then nobody's really a priority.
You know, the priority, at the end of the day, the priority is to help the most frail in our community and in our state. And who is more frail than individuals that are living in nursing homes? There's no one more frailer or more sick than those people. And we have to make sure that we take care of them. If the government is there to be the voice for the voiceless, and that's what this bill does, to ensure that we provide and take care of them and their families so they don't have to worry about having to transport them and transport them to another facility. And as we all know, when you transport an individual that's sick, even from a hospital, a lot of times they get worse. So it's better to shelter in place, have the facility up and running, so they can be in their own rooms or in their own beds.
Now, your bill again focuses on generators, on power, on those issues. Should there be a larger reform, though? I know that there's some members of the Senate, I think Gary Farmer, and who represents the area around Hollywood Hills. Do you think that, I think he's proposing much greater reform, liability, bringing back the ombudsman, making it more powerful. Should there be a wider reform?
I think we have to have the conversation. At the end of the day, there was 14 lives that were lost because of the fact that they didn't have a cooling place for them. So I think we need to make sure that we have a broader conversation. My bill will just focus on ensuring that we have power restored early, ensure that there's a place cool enough for them to stay, and ensure that they have a way to generate ice to keep the medicine cold. But that's not to say that we can't have a broader conversation and dialogue and debate in the legislature about how to take care of individuals who need to be taken care of the most.
The improvements that you would like to see nursing homes make in terms of having this additional power at the ready in case systems fail, should that be on the responsibility of the nursing homes to pay for it, or do you envision the state paying for that?
That's a great question, and that's what this bill is going to try to address. Because if it's a facility that's Medicaid with a Medicaid population, it's going to be much more difficult for them to pay the upfront cost. We're seeing that sometimes it's $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $100,000, $200,000, depending on the size of the facility. Now, but on the commercial side, it may be a little bit easier for them. But what we need to do is ensure that we have a dual track. Maybe it could be on a grant system. We could do some grants or some small business loans that we can provide to ensure that they have these generators in place. But it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but the one size it has to fit all is to make sure that they have a safe environment to live in right after the storm.
I want to play you one piece of sound because I think we're talking about things as they should be, but often when they get in the political system, they're not always the way they should be. This is what we're going to play now is a bit of sound. This was former State Senator Eleanor Sobel. You know her well. Absolutely. She appeared before that congressional hearing that we played some sound from earlier, and listen to what she had to say when she tried to make changes to nursing homes. Let's play that sound.
The history of the Florida legislature and the influence of special interests tells us why Florida is in this crisis mode. Reviewing the disaster that happened in the Hollywood Hills Rehab Center, this tragedy was predictable, waiting to happen. In 1998, when I was a freshman in the Florida House and I was a roommate of Congresswoman Wilson at the time, I introduced a bill to require ALFs to have air conditioning in their facilities. Imagine that, air conditioning in Florida. I was met with fierce opposition by an organized, powerful industry and called obscene names beginning with the letter F. I was told shade trees and fans would be acceptable, that seniors were often cold and did not need air conditioning. Eventually, the law passed in 2000 requiring merely cooling devices, and that's what's in the Florida statutes today.
Not even, so the Florida statutes don't even require ALFs and nursing homes to have air conditioning, just cooling systems. The point that she's making is clearly that the nursing home industry, the ALF industry, they're very powerful players in Tallahassee. They're major campaign contributors. They have powerful lobbyists. What are they likely to do in this, and how do you go against them?
Yeah, it's easy to go against them. It's, because we're on the side of right. We're on the side of the people right now. We're on the side of the most frail and elderly of our state. And together with the House of Representatives and the Senate, we can make sure we come up with a piece of legislation that will take care of them. Now, and we have to remember this. I'll take it a step further. In 2005 or 6, I'm not sure when it was, Jim, we in the House of Representatives passed a similar bill, and it died in the Senate right after Hurricane Wilma. Now, this year, after the tragic deaths that we see, I just can't imagine how any legislator can stand up there and vote against a piece of legislation that will go a long way to take care of our most frail.
I will tell you that I remember in 2011, the Miami Herald did a major series, on nursing home and cited death after death inside nursing homes. There were major pieces of legislation proposed. They died as well. They never made it through. So I understand that you're optimistic. Can you understand why the public might be a little pessimistic that when things get into the sausage making of Tallahassee, they get watered down and often lose focus?
No, and I get it, but this year I'll tell you that we are working across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats working across the chambers with the House of Representatives to make sure that we have a bill that will take care of these residents so this will never happen again in the state of Florida. I just can't imagine. And if any member that votes against this bill, I think that the voters should hold them accountable in the next election, because that's the only way that we can make sure that we have a transformative and reform in the nursing home industry.
Are you already getting some of that pushback, though? Are you already being visited by some of those lobbyists?
No, I've been visited, but I'm sticking to my guns. I'm not going to move from this because I really believe in it. It's the right thing to do, and it's what I always elected to do, to take care of those that don't have a voice. And I will be there. I will stand up. Cost me what it may cost me. It doesn't matter to me.
Let me ask you this. One other piece of reform, potentially. Could you envision creating a more independent ombudsman for elder affairs? Right now, the ombudsman's office is really tucked under the governor's office. We haven't heard from, I don't even know who the current ombudsman is. We don't hear from him very much. He hasn't been out in front on this. Shouldn't there be an independent voice for those seniors that you talk about that can advocate things across the state?
No, absolutely.
But can you make that part of your bill?
We have to. We'll look at that. We have to do the same thing we do for children. Children through the Voices for Children have ombudsman type individuals that stand up for them. We need to do the same thing for seniors, and we do have to give it a little bit more teeth and a little bit more autonomy to make sure they take care of the seniors. Because unfortunately, I mean, I'm very fortunate with my parents. I'm the one that's their caretaker. I take care of them, but there's a lot of seniors out there who don't have their children here with them and aren't able to take care of them, and there's a lot of negative consequences that come along with it, both on the financial side, people are trying to rip them off, and also who don't have the actual care that they need. So you need to make sure that there is a voice and someone watching out for them.
Senator Garcia, we'll talk more, I'm sure, about this through the session. Thank you for coming in. We'll be right back after the break.